Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our February EAC meeting. We're glad to have you all here. I see we're still getting a little bit of a stream of folks coming in. I thought we had slowed down and now we kind of kicked back up again, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully, you all know the Zoom how the functions work and all that by now. We've been doing this for quite some time, but I think our next slide has kind of how we'll handle our that's our agenda. And then, yeah, so if you do have questions, we'll ask that you raise your hand using the raise your hand function in the Zoom webinar. And then we will ask you to unmute your microphone. Your video is off in a webinar like this. And if you are one of our call-in, although I don't think I see any currently, but if for some reason your microphone isn't working or something along those lines, or you just don't want to ask your question verbally, then you can email us at advisorycommittee@calstrs.com, and that box is monitored throughout this meeting. So if we could go back to the agenda really quickly, you will notice that this is going to be primarily an all AB 1667 meeting. And because of that, we'll have a few folks that will be talking about 1667 and what it means for you and what it means for us as CalSTRS. If you could try and hold your questions, you can see we have a big open forum section at the end there. If you could try and hold your questions to that open forum, because we're pretty much focusing on one topic for this meeting, I'd like everyone to be able to get through their presentations, and then we can just have a big open discussion at the end, unless it's something that is time sensitive. So with that, Diane,
I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, we've added the QR code to this slide. So it will take folks with iPhones or cell phones, will take folks directly to the materials and the handouts related to and associated with this this agenda. So again, this is some technology we're hoping to incorporate to make it a little bit easier for those that are following along to get to the materials on the CalSTRS.com website. So that'll take you right to the advisory page. And as you scan to the bottom, you will see today's agenda and the supporting documentation.
Perfect. Okay, so with that, I think if we move to the next slide, we should be introducing Joycelyn, and there she is.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. It's already February, though. It's either January really fast or really slow for people, I'm sure, but we find ourselves at the beginning of the legislative session. And so you probably got to hear this morning from CalPERS, but the deadline for bill introductions is February 17th. So there's still lots of time for bills to be introduced that may touch on our system. But at this point, I'll go to the next slide and let you know what we have presented to our board thus far. We had a board meeting last week, and these were some early introductions in the year dealing with the Social Security offsets. And so the Social Security Fairness Act is back at the federal level. That's HR 82, same number as last year. So don't think you're experiencing Groundhog's Day. That did happen. I don't know if they orchestrated that or not, but same bill number. And then SJR 1, Senate Joint Resolution 1 by Senator Cortese. He's the chair of the policy committee in the Senate. That's the resolution to support the action at the federal level to repeal the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision that affect our members since they do not pay into Social Security. And so the board took a support position on both of those measures last week. And then also just I'll let you know on the legislation front, I think we can move to the next slide though, because I have proposals on here. So we have our legislative proposal that I've mentioned to you before on backdating our service retirement benefits and how far back members can backdate. And we're looking to limit that to 180 calendar days or 6 months in essence. And right now it's pretty open-ended back to 2012 or 2014, and there's issues associated with that. So we've been working on finding an author. We don't have one yet, but I will come back to you with a bill number if we're able to get that introduced for the 2023 session. And one thing I want to add here is that we hadn't had any housekeeping concepts. I probably mentioned that last time. We weren't planning to have anything in the bill that addresses both CalPERS and the county systems. There's usually an omnibus kind of housekeeping bill, but something has come up, and it's really on the CalSTRS side of things, but I will mention it to you so that you're aware, is for our employees or prospective employees, there is a federal background check that happens after a tentative offer is given. And the authority that we have in statute isn't enough anymore for it's the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, who does that work. We go through the Department of Justice, they go to the FBI, and they do the check at the federal level for convictions. And we look at the job related ones and then bring that into consideration with hiring decisions, because obviously our employees have access to members' personally identifiable information and money that's in the fund. And so in order to protect that, we go through that step. But if the authority isn't enough anymore, and there's been an extension through the end of this calendar year, we wouldn't have that protection. So we are looking to have language in the housekeeping bill that will allow us to continue to have federal background checks done by the FBI. So pretty straightforward, a continuation of a practice that has been many years ongoing. I joined CalSTRS 14 years ago and had a background check then. So turned out okay, I think. But we'll be looking to move that forward. I will bring up too that another bill has been introduced that will sound familiar, is fossil fuel divestment. So the bill number is SB 252. And it's by Senator Gonzalez. So just bring your attention to that. Don't have any updates on it really right now, except that it was introduced. And again, there'll be a lot more action before February 17th. So when we meet again in May, I'll have a longer list for you. But I also want to give you an update on regulations. So we have regulatory proposals that were presented to the board in November. And then the last one there on the list was just last week. And I think I was able to give you the update on the November ones because that's when we last met, but we have a proposal on CalSTRS 2% at 62, our members subject to PEPRA, and a requirement for their credible compensation that would be paid each pay period. We are in the midst of reviewing language. This approval at the board meeting in November was to begin the preliminary rulemaking activities. So we've been working with folks to see what would solve the problem of making sure if somebody starts before an official pay period, that not all of the compensation is kicked out because they are basically working their full assignment. And it wasn't the intention of PEPRA to have a few days worked in, let's say, August or June after the regular pay periods, that none of that be creditable. So our goal is to go to our board in March. Their meeting in March is March 1st and 2nd to start the formal rulemaking process, where there would be a public comment period and a public hearing so that folks can review that language. And then we're also looking at updates to our penalties and interest regulations. We're not as far along on that, so we're working on what those updates would be, and then we'll be reviewing those with folks again prior to starting the formal rulemaking process. And then just last week, we went to the board to make sure they're aware that as we implement AB 1667, which you'll of course get to hear more about later, but that if we have things that need specification or clarification, that we will be working on regulations for that going forward. So the board is aware and approve that effort as it is needed. And then also on that front, I'll just mention that we are aware that there are some updates to the AB 1667 statutory language that the sponsors are working on. The governor's office is involved. It doesn't necessarily change any of the approaches that we've been looking at and what you'll hear later. So it's a lot of clarification and reassurances that how we were looking at implementation and getting everything in order, making sure that that's clear in the statute. So that could, I'm anticipating that coming out later this year. So also on the ledge front for AB 1667 cleanup. That is all for proposals at this point in time, and we'll move to the next slide. So like I said, you're going to hear a lot more about implementation updates on 1667 from the next two speakers. So I'll skip over that. They'll have more details for you than I could give you. On SB 868, this was a supplemental benefit maintenance account increase. So we were working on updating our pension administration system to make sure folks who retired prior to 1999 get the increases in their SBMA benefit that were required by the law. So it goes into effect July 1st. The first SBMA check that comes out for the 23-24 fiscal year is around October 1st. And then last but not least, SB 1402 for military service credit purchases. This is for military service prior to being a member. If anyone is interested in that at your campuses, the form is now available so they can elect to purchase that service. There are requirements around how many years of service they need to have as a CalSTRS member, and there's a limit as to how much they can purchase, but that information is available now in the form. So those are all the updates I have, and I'll pause for questions here on anything not 1667 related. I'm not seeing any hands.
I don't see any either.
Well, I look forward to coming back in May with even more bills. So I'll talk to you then.
Thanks, Joycelyn.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so next, we're going to bring up Employer Services Director Jeff Zimmer to do a little introduction about AB 1667, and then he's going to turn it over to Samantha Kessner.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. As Kim said, my name is Jeff, and I have the pleasure of supporting our Employer Services Division as their director. I'm going to try and do 4 to 5 years of history in about 4 minutes. And it's to give you a little bit of a background of how we arrived at where we are with AB 1667. And then Samantha will kind of take you into the future of it and what we're currently doing. So about 4 or 5 years ago, like I mentioned, there was a legislation proposal that we presented to our board. And it talked about statute of limitations, and it put some additional accountability and burden on the employers. And we heard a lot of feedback from the employer community that not ready yet, wasn't ready for prime time. So we tabled that, and the board made a request that CalSTRS staff, us, work with our constituent groups for the stakeholders to work on a solution that addressed certain problems that we were trying to address with that legislation proposal. So what that resulted in was kind of 2 things. A consortium formed of member and employer stakeholders. So we had the California Teachers Association, California Retired Teachers Association, and they of course have connections to other member retirement and active groups. And then there was the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association, CCESA, from the employer side. So it was a balanced group of stakeholders, both from the member perspective and from the employer perspective. So they actually submitted to us, CalSTRS, a list of principles that they wanted us to address. Members should not be liable for overpayments that weren't their error, that CalSTRS provide guidance, that CalSTRS publish guidance that's only prospective starting in a school year, that we allow all members affected by an audit have the right to appeal. So that's that systemic population. So that wasn't currently in law or previously in law. And that we publish audits on the website. So there's a list of things that this consortium wanted us to handle. In parallel to that, we started doing things internally, big effort to kind of see what we could do to make improvements based on those principles and the requests from those stakeholders and from our board. And one of those things was to revisit that legislation and work with the stakeholder groups on it. So that consortium, CTA, CRTA, and CCESA, worked on a bill. Assemblyman Cooper at the time, he's now, I think, the sheriff of Sacramento County, but he was the assemblyman at the time that helped author the bill. And then the sponsors came up with language that they then worked with us to refine. It started very big, and then we started whittling it away and saying, I'm not sure if that's going to work, or that would be difficult for us as a pension plan for some IRS reasons. So we might want to stay away from that because it could, be more harm than good. And then we ultimately landed on what became AB 1667, which the sponsors and the author, Assemblyman Cooper, got to the governor's desk, passed both houses, both chambers, I should say, and then it got to the governor on September 29th is when Governor Newsom signed it. The first parts of that were effective January 1st, 2023. So we had like 7 weeks to get everything ready for January 1st, 2023. So I just wanted to kind of set that up. We'll go into the details of what it means and how we're implementing it and the impacts and all of that. I hope many of you, if not all of you, are aware of this already. So I don't mean to be redundant, but I did want to set up just kind of the path that it took to get us here and the involvement by the member and employer groups to help author the legislation that we kind of, again, gave some feedback and refinement to, that they ultimately presented and got passed. So we are reacting to this in the same way that you may be, and we want to provide as much information as we can. We just sent out our Employer Connect newsletter that had links and more information about this. We have FAQs on our CalSTRS.com website, and there will be more to come as we get more into this. It's only been 30 days, maybe 31, but we're learning a lot as we go along, and we want to make sure that we continue to keep you informed as we learn these things to make sure that you're prepared for the impacts and some of the benefits that will be coming your way. So again, big, long history in as short amount of time as I could possibly give you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Samantha Kesner, who's been our implementation and business lead internally on this, which is a gargantuan effort that spans almost the entirety of CalSTRS and all of our different business areas. And she's been really holding everything together, again, to get us to that 1/1/23 implementation date. And now we're starting on the things that happen July 1st of 23. So thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to see all of you, as it were. And I'd like to turn it over to Samantha. Samantha, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about a little bit about AB 1667 and sort of what it does, and then I'll go into kind of how it affects you all as employers. So first, just some background. The bill, if you can go to the next slide, that would be good. Thanks. The bill does 4 major things, so 4 major changes, and made a lot of changes to the overpayment liability rules. Previously, if whatever overpayment happened, we were taking it out of the member's retirement benefit to pay back the overpayments. And so now with AB 1667, if the overpayment is triggered by member information, something that they've given us, then that the member would still be responsible for paying back those overpayments. But if the overpayment is triggered by employer information or employer adjustments, those things will now be considered an employer responsibility to pay back that overpayment. And then for CalSTRS errors or CalSTRS information, when we make mistakes or do data fixes or things like that, those will be considered CalSTRS error. And the way the bill has it set up, it will 85% of the cost of the CalSTRS errors would be responsible, would go to the state of California to pay us back for that and make us whole. And then 15% will go to the employers as a whole. And I'll get more into detail on that in the next slide. But then we also have changes to the employer audit process. So nothing major, but just different notifications. So we'll be notifying the unions as well as the employers when there's an audit. And then we also have, as Jeff mentioned, all members now who are impacted by an audit will have administrative hearing rights after the final audit is completed. And then employers will also be responsible for providing us with the list of impacted members. So, and again, I'll get into more detail on that in future slides. And there's a new advisory letter process. So a new formal way for employers and unions also to reach out to us with specific compensation questions, and we can give formal guidance about how to report or if the compensation is reportable at all. And so that is coming, those are coming in July. And then also in July, we'll be publishing additional resources for everyone, employers and members and everyone to see for how to, how to report things, what is credible service, what is credible compensation, and all that stuff that you guys ask us about a lot. So hopefully that will be helpful to you as well. So we can go on to the next slide. So specifically about overpayments, just as far as employers are concerned. So as I said, if there's an overpayment that's caused by CalSTRS information, beginning July 1st of 2024, there'll be an 85 and 15% split. So the total collectible amount, 85% of that will be billed to the state, and then 15% of that will be billed to employers. And it'll be all employers throughout the state and in proportionate to their share of contributions for the previous year. And then it'll go on an annual basis, that billing. And then all the overpayments that are caused by any employer information, those will be billed separately and billed to the counties on a quarterly basis is what we're thinking. The CalSTRS information is very specific in the law about how, annual billing and the 85 and the 15. The employer information billing, we have a little more flexibility on that. So this is our tentative plan of how we would like to see it implemented. But it's all of our first times, and we're open to having discussions on these things. But this is what we've settled on so far. So a tentative schedule would be the first billing period would be any overpayments triggered by employer information that happened January 1st through March 31st of this year of 2023. And then we'll need to collect them all and get an invoice ready for you guys, and then mail that invoice to employers. We're looking at no earlier than May 1st. Again, as we start through the process of doing this the first time, there are definitely going to be some bumps in the road. So we aren't sure if we're going to be able to get it on May 1st or after May 1st, but we'll definitely keep everybody in the loop as things get closer to that date. Next slide, please. And then as far as the audit and appeals implementation is going, as far as employers are concerned, again, I mentioned notification with unions. So we're going to need employers' help to provide that information, the contact information for the local unions to CalSTRS, so we can reach out to them and provide the notification required. And then once a final audit report is issued, the employers will have 60 days to submit a list of members impacted by each finding in the audit. And then also, this isn't really new, but it is specifically in the bill now. So I just wanted to mention it, that employers can request an administrative hearing in writing within 90 days of the final audit report as well. So all that information, we redid all of our communications about employer audits so that we're, very clear about what information we're requesting from the employers and what information, we're giving out as far as the audit goes. So you'll see, if you are audited, all this information will be written out in the engagement letter process and the draft audit reports that you'll receive, and the final audit report as well. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, the advisory letters process, and then the additional resources that the bill requires CalSTRS to publish, those two will be effective July 1st of this year of 2023. So we're having those internal conversations now about how we're going to be implementing those pieces of the bill. So I don't have a lot of details yet about what that's going to look like, but we'll definitely have more information for you guys at the next EAC in May. So it'll be a little closer to when these parts of the bill be effective. And again, we're open to discussions about what makes sense for you guys, and we'll work with you on that type of stuff and let you have more information about the details about what's coming. So, and then I just wanted to give everyone a list of resources. So if you can go to the next slide. These are the things that we published on our website. So we have a FAQ specific for things that employers might ask about. So that's on our website currently. As Jeff mentioned, we published an employer circular last month. I think it was before the new year. And so that is up as well for everyone. And then we also have an adjustment and overpayment FAQ for members who receive an adjustment or award letter. It has the link to this website. So if they want more information about the new overpayments process and what things they might be responsible for versus an employer or CalSTRS overpayment trigger, then they can get more information there. And then we also have a member sort of focused FAQ as well for any questions we thought that members might ask about the bill. So these are just some resources that we wanted to make sure we got out to everyone as quickly as possible, so that we everybody has at least a basic understanding of the bill and how it affects each part of our membership. So that is all I had for you guys today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, so I believe this is the place in our agenda where we are going to open it up to you guys, because we know that 1667 has been talked about a lot, and we want to be able to provide you the opportunity to ask questions here and share information. So I see Vina's hand up. If we could get Vina to unmute, allow her to unmute.
Hi.
Hi, Vina.
Hi. It's not a question, it's a request. that because we have almost like becoming more like a accounts payable department. So we wanted to see as much as possible if the invoices can be billed directly to the districts, just like you do the unused sick leave, as much as possible. That's all.
And I don't know if we have anyone from financial services on the call that could maybe speak to that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just wanted to kind of mention that
Just put it out there.
it's becoming harder for us to track and charge the district, transfer the money, pay STRS and PERS. So once you know the employer, it would be nice that you just send them the bill directly, whatever happened. Unless it involves corrections or something, I'm not sure. But if possible, that's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Fina. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I know, Vina, if you could just lower your hand, that'd be great. Thank you. Talina, if we could have Talina set her up to unmute her microphone. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, in regards to Vina's comment, yeah, that would be really helpful for us too, because we have so many districts under our county office that if they could get billed like they do the enhancement invoices, that would be really efficient and a really efficient process for all of us. But I did have a question about the January 1st through March period that you guys are referencing, where we're going to get the first statements. We have a lot of districts that are in the middle of an audit or are going to get their final audit report, effective January 1st or later. So how is CalSTRS going to determine, or what are you guys going to use to decide that this is like an employer error versus a STRS error? Like what is that going to look like for us? Because this is all new, and then they started their audits, before this bill went into effect.
Samantha,
Thank
do you
you.
want to?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, go
Can I
Samantha,
answer
go.
that? And then you guys, if I miss anything, please back me up here. So, yeah, I can't, anything basically that is an overpayment that's triggered by any employer information or an adjustment. So all audits findings, well, I won't say all, most audit findings, in most cases, audit findings would be considered an employer information because the employers are being audited. There was incorrect reporting of some kind, and it comes back uncovered by the audit, and then the employer needs to make those corrections, those adjustments. So the employer adjustments would be new employer information that would be coming in, and we would deem those employer error.
Okay, then what would be an example of a STRS error?
So a CalSTRS error, we would say are like our data fixes, anything internal that we would touch or do. So if we were entering in, somebody's birth date or something in the system and it was found to be incorrect later on, all those things would be CalSTRS error.
What about when we get direction, like from the training team or employer help, and the district reaches out with their specific bargaining unit language, the specific stipend information, and then it turns around and they get audited, and for whatever reason, like something's changed and now the district has to make an adjustment? Is,
Yes,
what kind of recourse do we have in this situation?
So we do that. The bill also does address that a little bit in the advisory letter process that I mentioned. It will be a formal guidance where an employer can reach out and ask those questions. What is this compensation? Is this compensation reportable to CalSTRS, and how do I report it? And if we tell you through an advisory letter, this is how you report it, and later on in an audit, for some reason, we come back and say, oh no, that was incorrect, and now you need to re-report it, those would be considered CalSTRS errors.
And okay, so what room do we have to work with that for this time period before the advisory letters go live, and for the period of January 1st to June? How, what can the district do if they do have documentation that we were given specific direction and it ends up being an audit finding and we have to go back and change it? Is this something that we have to go through the appeals process, or do we now have the districts included in their audit response?
Jeff, I don't know if you want to take that.
I think effectively it would still be the audit process. The advisory letters are not effective until July 1st of 23. So your recourse now would be the same as it has been in the past, that if you have a dispute with an audit finding, you would dispute and appeal that audit. What is starting now is for any audit that commences, I just wanted to mention this, any audit that commences in 2023 under these new rules, the exclusive representative or the union at the district will also be notified of the audit and may have additional input or feedback to the preliminary draft audit report. So they'll also be providing information to the process as well, which we also hear. So those are things that we would take into consideration when we're working on the findings. But to answer your question right now, if there's a finding that you don't agree with, you would use the normal appeal process for that audit.
Okay, so I thought of something when you were saying that. Okay, so if we get charged May 1st for something that, the district is going to want to appeal, or is there going to be a P&I waiver type of situation for these assessments, or, are they going to be on hold until the case gets resolved, until we get a final determination?
The short answer is the legislation is silent on that. It's something that we're aware of that we may have to modify in the future, but the current legislation does not allow an appeal of a formal appeal of a determination of liability for an overpayment.
And I do just want to add to that, in the case of all of this, we're only talking about retirees' benefits that have been overpaid. So
yes,
it's not everything. It's not all corrections. It doesn't have anything to do with contributions or anything like that. And so we try not to affect retirees in our audits. So hopefully this isn't as massive as it sounds. But I just wanted to make the clarification as well.
Thank you, Samantha. And while I have the mic open just for a second, and Talini, if you have more questions, please. But your previous question, along with Vina's, your comment about, billing the district, the law actually says our interaction is with the county. So it specifically says that it shall be recovered as applicable from that county superintendent of schools. And if the overpayment is resulted from an error of an employer, the county superintendent of schools may recover the amounts from that employer. So our interaction in law is with the counties, the report sources. So that is who we're going to invoice initially.
Okay, so I see Vina's hand up as well. Can we ask Vina to unmute as we did before? Did your question get answered, Vina?
I just wanted to ask one other item that, it says creates a new advisory letter process where unions and all, they will be able to get guidance on creditable comp and all. So, normally whenever we ask STRS for any guidance, they always need actual cases before they give guidance. So is it going to be generic, like they can discuss before they make a decision so they are more educated?
That's a good question. So the law specifically requires that they provide us the language that's going to be in any sort of agreement. So an MOU or anything like that, that is in or proposed to be in. So they would have to provide us with a very specific language on the compensation item that they're talking about for a question. This would not be a general question answering process.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question, Vina. And the advisory letter process obviously is very new, and the workload for us is unknown. How I kind of see it working is that I'm glad you brought this up. Should you have a hypothetical question or generic, like, hey, how does this generally be reported? please reach out to employer help and we will get you an answer for that. If it's something complicated at negotiations, you're like, hey, this is a weird one, we don't know what to do with this specifically. That's when you might want to engage with the formal advisory letter process and say, hey, here's an MOU, here's a side letter, here's a contract, here's a salary schedule, whatever it is that we need to determine how to report that compensation. That's when you would go through the formal advisory letter and you would provide that. We would say, okay, we can answer your question based on the information that you've given us, or we would ask for additional information should we need it. And then we would provide you that formal advisory letter, which basically is a liability shifter. So if you have an advisory letter that says, thank you for providing all this information, we think you should report that stipend like this. And then you get audited 4 years from now, or one of your districts get audited 4 years from now. And we say, no, you should have done your stipend like that. You can take the advisory letter and say, no. We have a formal advisory letter from CalSTRS that says report it this way. Should there be an overpayment to a retiree, like Samantha was saying, that burden for the liability would shift to CalSTRS. So the advisory letter would transfer the liability to CalSTRS should we change our mind in the future. And you would have that formal request that you've already gone through. So that's something that we're working on. How is the workload going to shift? Because we still want you to take training. The training is still applicable. And our employer help representatives are there to help with your questions. And the advisory letter is that release valve for, okay, this is a really strange one. We really want to make sure we're getting this one right. So let's send it through the formal advisory letter process, supply all the documentation that's necessary. That way you can be more confident that you're reporting it correctly. And if we should change our mind in the future, which I don't know why we would after a formal advisory letter, quite frankly, it's going to be exhaustive. So you should be able to rely on that in the future. But in case you don't, the liability shifts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about this process or anything relating to 1667, what's coming, what's
Yeah.
already started? No other hands, huh?
Kim, if you don't mind, Talina asked a really good question about, she was asking kind of at a high level, I think, about, how does CalSTRS determine the liability for each of these overpayments? Just to let you know what's happening at CalSTRS and has been for the last 30 days since we've been under this new legislation and its mandate, we're looking at every receivable. So we look at every single receivable that creates for a retired member or a member on disability or even a survivor. So any benefit recipient, we're looking at any receivable that it creates. Then we look at it and say, whoops, that's because the member wanted to change their BED. So there was a little bit of an overpayment because their BED moved out a little bit. Or, hey, that's because there was a notification of death that wasn't reported timely. So we didn't know a member was dead and we overpaid the benefit to the beneficiary, or overpaid the benefit to the member, not knowing that member had deceased. So we've got to pull that back and then we'll start the survivor benefit allowance, should there be one. Those sorts of things. We're trying to determine, okay, these are those. And then eventually it gets to my team. And then we're also looking at CalSTRS error. Whoops, we entered the birth date wrong, like Samantha said, or whoops, we know that was a data fix for our pension solution project. We know that was a population of members that we changed for some reason. So put them over here into the CalSTRS bucket. And then finally, it'll trickle down to my teams and say, okay, the remaining ones of these looks like it was an employer adjustment that changed final comp or service credit. So let's look into those and see which district it was and how then we can create a list of those that will eventually become the invoice to each county for each member in each district. Now, most of these are very small amounts. So again, we're doing this for only 30 days now, and we'll know more as we do more. But that hopefully gives you a little bit of background, Talina, about the due diligence that we put into looking at each one of these receivables that create overpayments and what the disposition of that liability.
I see a hand from Jennifer first, and then we'll go to Anna. So Jennifer, if we can let Jennifer unmute her.
Hello.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. So I have a question. So I know that you mentioned that the advisory letters are not going to come into effect till July of 2023. But any guidance that we've gotten in the past from employer training, all of that, if it comes into play into a future, I guess, audit, will that be taken into consideration? Because a lot of our stuff is like ongoing, but it's guidance that we've gotten like in the past, and we've had audits before. And we know that some of that stuff does come into play, that the old emails or the old whatever we've gotten from STRS. So I mean, just want to make sure that it's not only going to be that when you're looking at these audits, it's not only the advisory letters that are being taken into consideration, but also the old stuff that we've gotten guidance on in the past.
That makes sense. And yes, I mean, when an audit concludes and should you dispute one of the findings, often you will bring up, rightly so, hey, this is the advice that we got from CalSTRS, and that you can continue to do that. And we do listen to that. We say, oh, that we shouldn't have said that, or there was a mistake there, or miscommunication, or there was some nuance that we didn't understand at the time when we provided the guidance. There was some other piece of information that actually didn't give us the whole picture. That's kind of why with the advisory letter process, we try to make it as exhaustive as possible to say we need everything that we can possibly have to make a determination to give you a formal advisory letter. So kind of like we said with Talina, that currently you would still continue to potentially dispute and appeal an audit finding. And then whatever guidance you had been provided in the past, we would consider that and then take it into account during your appeal.
Okay.
Kind of like today or last year. I shouldn't say today because everything changed on January 1st, but like our past practice.
Okay, and then the other question on the invoices, when you're getting the invoice, it's going to be a hard copy that the county office is going to receive, and is it going to be addressed to the superintendent? And then you mentioned that it is something that the county office has to pay, but that we have the ability to bill back the school districts. Is there going to be a breakdown of all that information
Yes.
for telling us specifically this is what this school district has to pay and so on and so forth?
Yes. And
Okay.
I can't speak to the paper nature of it. I think it's going to be, I think Talina mentioned like the billing for the retirement incentive. So we're going to, I think, mirror that employer accounts receivable process that we have. So it's separate from contribution cash and all that, the monthly reporting that you do for those. And then this would be a separate kind of receivable invoice that you would get. We can follow up with our financial services area and see exactly how it's going to happen. But what I can answer for you, it's going to be by report source, so county, and then districts in that county, the units in that report source, then may have them, and then by member, it's this member, this client ID, and this is the overpayment amount. So you can see the total for the county broken down by district, and then we would provide that to the county, again, per the legislation, per law, and then you would have the power, again, in the law to go find that money from each of the districts, should you desire to.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and then Anna, if we could get Anna to unmute. Anna, are you able to unmute your microphone? There we go.
Okay, hi. Okay, so I understand adjustments due to an audit finding and the invoicing, the dispute process, all that. Jeff, you mentioned something about capturing data right now. Like if we're making adjustments, you are capturing that information and seeing what type of adjustments it creates for a retiree. So if we were to make an adjustment today that for a retired member that reduces their compensation, that will create a receivable, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So with the audit, we kind of have advance notice, so something will be is potentially going to create an invoice. With our normal audit of the retirement reports, I mean, we audit thousands of lines. So we really don't know, as a county office, we're auditing 30, 40 different agencies. What we do, I think it will be difficult for us to keep track of, we made adjustments to a retiree that is going to result in a invoice. So when that invoice gets posted, I believe we only have 30 days to pay it. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out the time frame that we would have as a county office to determine, okay, why is an adjustment made? Why is there an invoice? What do we do as an adjustment for that retired employee, and notify the district that, you know, potentially there's going to be an issue with this, that there may be an invoice. I think I'm just starting to, I think it's just going to add a little bit more work on our side, and it's trying to figure out how to capture that as part of our normal adjustment process when we audit the report.
Remember too, Anna, that it's not going to generate an invoice to you immediately,
Right.
right? We're not billing monthly currently. It's quarterly, right, Samantha?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you make an adjustment today, unless it gets caught up in the closest, you know, on the edge of the quarter, you're not going to see that for a little bit. So you have some time. And again, I don't know that we have the full scope of what the financial services process is going to be, but you will get a breakdown, so you'll be able to track back to the adjustments that you made, to the receivables that you get invoiced for. But it wouldn't be like today you make an adjustment and tomorrow you're going to have a bill show up in your account, kind of thing.
Yeah, our intent is to give you as much information as possible on the invoices too. So we don't want you to just get a bill for, you know, $1,000 or something and you have no idea where it is. Like Jeff said, we will break it out by district, and we will have it by member, you know, account name or CID or something, and the amount, and then any information we can provide if it's a general sort of reasoning that we can give you, like this was from an audit versus just a general adjustment that was made, then we'll do that as well. We don't want you to be in the dark on this stuff.
I just think that adjustments that are due to an audit finding, we have enough time to kind of like exhaust our appeal process and to finally determine, yeah, this definitely was an error. We need to make a payment. On the other situation is, it could be that maybe we keep punching something wrong. Really, the receivable is not really due. It's an error that was done through an adjustment. So there is a possibility that the invoice may not be due, and that we don't have time to dispute a payment that potentially could be reversed later on. So I'm just trying to capture that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So unfortunately, the law is silent on any sort of dispute process outside of the current audit process, dispute process that you have. So there's not actually going to be a chance for you to dispute anything outside of the audit process. So like I said, we're going to give you as much information as we can. We're always happy to work with you, if you have questions on things. But there is no channel for you to actually, formally dispute an adjustment that was made, and us translating that into that was an employer adjustment. Therefore, employer information has changed, and the employer is responsible for paying for that overpayment.
Okay.
Anna, thank you for the questions. And I've spoken with Anna and her peers in other forums as well about, since we're looking at this every day, we've heard from that group, our employer partner colleagues, about, hey, if there's a big one, can you let us know? If you have an audit population, you might say, oh, we're touching 2,000 members and 45 of them are retired, and there's probably going to be an overpayment associated with that. But the day-to-day, when you just submit a correction because you found something that you needed to submit, you might not know it's coming, if that makes sense. I mean, you might know that it's a retired member and there could be an overpayment, but you don't know the amount. So we're trying to figure out, how do we give you a little bit of advance notice? Maybe we only bill you quarterly, but we'll let you know along the way, like, hey, just to let you know, we found an employer adjustment that caused an overpayment of $5,000 or some threshold, so that you're more aware of what's potentially coming to your county and therefore the district.
So is that an option then, as we submit adjustments and you're capturing that data? Can that be something that we share? It's like, okay, these are potential invoices.
Yeah, I mean,
ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really yes, it's a potential invoice, but it's kind of more than that. I mean, the receivable happened, the recalculation happened because of the adjustment. So therefore, it's a real receivable. It's not a potential one. I know what you're saying, Anna, but we do want to say, we want to do our best to give you as much knowledge as possible about what's potentially coming. That's what I'm trying to say, Anna. And so I don't know exactly how that's going to work. I don't think it's going to be weekly or anything, but we are looking at these to say, is there any big ones? I asked my team that like last week, this week, actually, I'm like, what have you seen? Anything big? And then so far so good. But if we see something, we want to give you advance notice about it happening. And I mean, the law is pretty black and white about, there's a CalSTRS error, there's member supplied information, and then there's re-reporting of compensation or an employer adjustment. Those are the three ways that we get an overpayment or a recalculation. Some of these are underpayments too. So I'll say those are the three ways we get a recalculation of a benefit or an allowance paid to a survivor or a disabilitant. So it's pretty clear about what those three are. And, in terms of past guidance, we want to be sure that when we start July 1st of 23, that you're clear on what a resource is, because we have now an obligation to publish resources clarifying the law. And we want to clarifying reporting requirements. So we want to make sure that when we publish something like a circular, it's marked that this is a resource for kind of AB 1667 purposes. We'll come up with better language than that. But those things that we mark as that this is it, those things you can say, no, wait a minute, you said in your circular, and it says this is a resource per the law. We reported based on that, and that would also help determine the liability, be it CalSTRS error, if we change our minds about it. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more information about where we're going. And the reason we can't do that with training is because training is a little bit more at a higher level than a specific. So sometimes, as you know, it's hard to apply, a conceptual training. As much as we're trying to put more examples and specifics into the training, it can't always translate right to that one situation about your, part-time outgrowthy football coach that worked 2 weeks. And, that situation might not be handled by the training, but should we provide you an advisory letter for that situation about the football coach and the thing, then that would give you the guidance that you can use to confidently report.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps. Yeah, just more to come. And we're really trying to figure this out for the resources part of it. And that's what we're working on now. So again, we'll share more information as we have it, but these are all excellent questions and I can understand where you're coming from.
Okay, thanks.
I do want to make a clarification, or just not really clarification, but just expand on, Jeff had mentioned the three groups, three ways that we can get a receivable. And I don't want you all to be stuck on the word error, because essentially if you re-report and we determine that re-reporting was either, it was an error, or just maybe you renegotiated something and you re-reported and it caused a change, that if it causes a receivable to a retiree, right? We're just talking about to retirees' benefits, not talking about contributions or any of those things. So don't get stuck too much on the word error, because you're not necessarily finding fault. It's just, this is the trigger for the benefit change. And then I think Talina's hand. I don't know if that's up from before or if you have another question.
I do have another question that came up when Anna was bringing up the notification. If we could have the STM number on the line item that triggered the overpayment, that would be helpful to us so that we can backtrack to see what type of adjustment we submitted on behalf of the district. The other thing was, since it's quarterly, there could be, errors generated by the district where they accidentally overpaid or they took back money for a retiree. And then this receivable gets created and it's like, oh no, that was a mistake that we made. So now we've paid this receivable, we've charged them, sent it to STRS, and then they turn around and make the adjustment to offset that overpayment. Would tell me that would give us the refund back to the district. Would that, or is that like another process?
That's a good question.
Yes.
I don't know that
That's a good
four of us
question.
with our pictures up here could answer that, but we might have to track back to our financial services group and have them answer that for you.
Yeah, I'll definitely take the STM number comment back to them and make sure, because like I said, we don't have the full picture of what's going to be included. So that's super helpful. And then as far as your specific example, yeah, we would need to, so underpayments are not involved in this bill at all. Those will continue to go out as they normally do today. How that would affect any overpayments, it depends on when the overpayment was established. If overpayment was established first or the underpayment was established first. So that's a little sticky. I'll definitely take that back and ask FSB sort of how that
I
would
think
work.
more so like if we submitted an adjustment line that created an overpayment, and then we got our quarterly bill and we paid the bill, and then the district realized that that line item should have never happened. So we should essentially let that receivable would have never been created, but we've already paid the cost. I'm more so concerned about how do I recoup that money, because it was a mistake that was undone. That's no longer an issue. That's more so my question.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have to check with how that's going to work. We definitely have to track back with you on that, because I don't think any of us have that answer right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to have to be case by case, Talina, because I'm hoping that's an exception. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen very often. So we probably figure that out case by case. We're of course aware the main changes to a retiree's benefit happen within the first 6 months. So, they retire and then maybe you re-report the last month, or there's something that happens. And then of course the sick leave reporting comes in. That usually creates an underpayment because there's more service credit for that member. And so a lot of the changes happen in those first 6 months. That's what we've always told the board. And hopefully you've heard the same thing. So that's why having a longer bill, we don't want to do this daily. We certainly don't want to do it weekly.
No.
We heard that loud and clear. And frankly, we don't want to do it either, because things happen, right? So we want room to breathe for the situation that you brought up. If there's a timing thing where we bill you on the very last day of the quarter for a recalculation that causes a receivable, and then the next week, the next quarter, you fix it, or something happens differently, that's when we're going to have to do it case by case, because we just don't know how to do that yet. Frankly, this is all new for us too.
Thank you.
Vina, did you have another question?
It's a request that since everything is getting more complicated and will result into some consequences, if we can have a simpler definition of like special comp, additional duties, lump sum payment, ongoing, one time, with examples that districts can consume it, like easily understand and digest, than a lot of legal language. I mean, there should be a ed code and all underneath if they need to refer, but a simpler language helps them to understand with example. So just requesting if we can come up with that as well.
Vina, loud and clear.
Okay.
Loud and clear. Tell your friends, yes, more to come on that, but loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
So I do have a question that came in through the email box. And so I'm going to read this. The question is, who is responsible for retired member activities? For example, if a retiree who retired with an incentive returns to work in their prior district within 5 years and they lose the incentive, I would assume it is up to the retiree themselves to be responsible for their own benefit, but I could see a retiree who would place the blame on their employer for not warning them. We have a lot of new HR staff at districts who may not be aware of prior incentive payouts. Samantha, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah. So that you're correct. That would be a member information. So that would be normal course of business that we do, not affected by the AB 1667 rules. So we would recoup that from the member's benefit.
And you're also right, they're going to appeal it and say it's the employer's fault.
Yeah.
Sorry, kind of off the record, but I know we're being recorded. I totally can see that situation happening in that exact instance. You received a 2-year retirement incentive, and for reasons unknown, you accidentally went back to work for the same district within 5 years. You should have been, the member should have been notified. The employer has an obligation to notify and all of that. So I understand why the member might say, but I didn't know. So that would have to, I would imagine the member would appeal that, and then that would go through our normal administrative hearing process, or executive review and administrative hearing process. But that's the kind of stuff that's probably going to come up. I hear you.
All right, thank you for that, for the question and the answers. Any other questions? That's the only one I've gotten through the box so far. And I did see Debbie had a hand up. I'm hoping that we got your question answered and that you didn't just get tired of waiting. But if you if you still have a question, please raise your hand. Oh, there you are. Debbie, can we get Debbie to unmute, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh gosh, I'm hearing myself. Sorry. I wasn't at the last meeting. Sorry about that night. And the first half of this meeting, everything was breaking up, so I couldn't quite hear everything. So everyone, please be patient with me if you would. If I'm asking questions, the same questions. I'm trying to wrap my I'm trying to wrap my arms. I'm going to take off my headset for a minute because I'm hearing an echo. Okay, I'm trying to wrap my arms around all this in general. And I'm warning to Lena now. I'm probably going to give her a call later anyway. But so it looks to me like the AB 1667 is basically just telling us that we're going to have other charges that we're going to see on a quarterly basis besides the contributions that we're sending to you each month. And if there's a retiree where their benefit has been recalculated because of something we did on our end, for example, and missed reporting something, or that we're going to see another bill to make up for that cost because we maybe hadn't sent in contributions over the years for that. Is that the idea of what's going on here?
Almost, yeah, everything except for the contributions part.
Okay, now as far as the list of audits, those of us that are going to be on an audit for 2023, is that's just your normal audit schedule? And so
Yes.
our time is up and we're due, is basically what it is.
Yes, yeah.
Which is fine.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just trying to get my arms around this, like I said. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. It's huge and it's brand new in a lot of ways for us and for you guys. So please, we're here to answer your questions. No question too small. It's all important. So please ask away.
Are you able to hear me still?
Yes.
As far as this invoice that in ours will come through Lego, obviously. How do you know who it is right now that has extra charges associated with them? Is it something that you guys have been looking at, going back how many years, or these are just the ones that something happened and you see that they should have been paid more in the retirement or something? I'm just trying to figure out how you came up with that original list.
Sure. So we get every morning we get a list of all of the receivables that established the day before. So anytime there was a retiree's benefit where something changed and it was recalculated and an overpayment created because of the recalculation, that goes on a daily list that we're actually looking at each day. We have staff looking at each day and going through it. It's broken out by employer, by district, by member account information. And so we actually that's how we're generating the list. So and it's only for overpayments that started being established as of January 1st, 2023. So none of the past years or anything, we're not looking at any of that stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. And Debbie's question actually reminded me of two things. One is, and Samantha was getting near it, is this is not retroactive. If a retiree from your district or one of your districts has an existing receivable, they will continue to pay it back. It did not wash those as of 1/1/23. So if they have a receivable they've been paying on, just in case someone comes to you with questions about this, says, hey, I have a receivable, doesn't it go away with this new law? No, it does not. And it is only for, as Samantha said, 1/1/23 and beyond. And that's one of the things that we're making very sure in the legislative cleanup that we specify that. We understand that's the intent. We just want to make sure that's explicitly in there, but that's what we're going on. And then the second thing is, some of you may deal with CalPERS, and there was another law for CalPERS, I think it was SB 278, where the employer was also kind of on the hook for a penalty to make up for some of the benefit reduction for a CalPERS retiree that had a similar adjustment. We're not like that. We're not doing that. So I think it's really important for everyone to know, and I say this to member stakeholder groups, and I'll say it to you as well. The benefit goes down. So if the recalculation event happens and it's a lower benefit, CalSTRS will continue to pay that benefit because that is the accurate benefit based on the information that we have. There is no employer makeup for the difference between the prior benefit and the new benefit that's been recalculated. And again, it's just the overpayment that might have been due for the time that the member was overpaid the old inaccurate amount. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
from a benefits perspective, and just in case you get a retiree coming to the county office or the district and asking some questions about this, I just want to make that very clear about how the benefit recalculation is treated. We're still doing it. There's no makeup for it. It is not retroactive.
So once you guys figure out that their benefit was reduced, it's just that time frame between when they first retired and you found out, that's when we'll be liable, but not forever.
Exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, so it kind of is to the employer, to the district and the county's benefit to report corrections quicker. Otherwise, the meter's running on that overpayment. So
Okay.
the sooner the corrections come in, the tighter the window is for any potential overpaid benefits for the period that we're waiting for those corrections from an audit, for example.
Thank you.
Any other questions that have come up as you have all listened to the discussion? Nancy, I have a hand from Nancy. If we could let Nancy unmute, that would be great.
Here we go. Hi. So dealing with about those overpayment benefit, if the district make a correction to the, I guess usually we report unused sick leave days at the time of retirement, and then later on we have discovered there was an error in the reporting number of days. So that reduces this person's ongoing benefits. So my question is about the prior. So this person is retired like more than 5 years ago. Does this mean this liability of this reduced benefit for this 5 years is coming due?
Yes, yeah, it depends on what the trigger was for why the benefit got reduced, which will determine which bucket it went into, whether member information triggered it or employer information triggered it, or if it was a CalSTRS error. But yes, that would,
Okay.
once the actual benefit gets adjusted down, that's when whatever party is responsible will be billed.
And then there's no statute or limitation going back. So let's say this was 10 years ago, it's going to be 10 years worth.
There is, the statute of limitations law is still in place. So so there are times when we won't be able to collect the whole thing. I am not an expert in the statute of limitations, so I can't break down statute of limitations for you, but I can get more information on that specific.
Yeah, if you can find out what that is, so I can kind of comfort the impacted employee or retiree, so to speak.
Okay. Yes, I can.
Well, I just want to clarify the
Yeah.
statute of limitations would apply to the overpayment. The benefit would still go down for that
Right.
member for every monthly allowance payment in the future.
Right.
But the
I understand
overpayment
that.
amount, the retiree might be okay with it because if it's not due to their member supplied information, they may not be liable for that overpayment. But yes, the statute of limitations is an important variable to all of this. And I think the legislation is motivating to make corrections as close to retirement as possible to avoid the situation that you brought up, Nancy, as best that we can. It goes for CalSTRS too.
So still the same question that, you know, I like to know how far back this this adjustment either may be liable from the employer or the employee. How far back are we supposed to be paying? Let's say it was 5 years ago, and is that statute of limitation 5 years, or is 10 years ago, and it's going back 10 years?
I'll jump in here. This is Joycelyn, Director of Governmental Relations.
Thanks, Joycelyn.
Yeah, of course. And so for For member information and employer information, if I'm recalling correctly, the statute of limitations begins when the collection begins. And if we begin that collection within 3 years of discovery, then we can collect the full amount. So, how our statute of limitations works on that front.
Okay, got it. Got it. All right, thank you.
I have another emailed question. And it says specifically, to piggyback on what Jeff said a little bit ago, things happen. Will there be any type of grace period when an employee first retires for last minute adjustments that are made the month after retirement to get the employee reporting correct? Sometimes you have to adjust for salary overpayments, sick leave docs, etc., that were not able to be put on that final check, usually for timing issues.
I understand. That's why I mentioned before, we're trying to make the billing periods as long as possible to allow for some of that fluctuation to happen. There's not a formal grace period, but as also Samantha mentioned in the beginning, there's no specific language in the law that says we must bill daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. I think there's disadvantages to doing it daily, and there's disadvantages to doing it yearly, for example, to use the two extremes in my metaphor here or my analogy. So I think by trying to keep the billing quarterly, we can hopefully account for some of those adjustments that happen right after retirement. So it's certainly something that we're aware of. We understand that, and we want to make sure we have a sane approach to how we do that.
I don't see any more hands, and I'm gonna double check my email just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so I don't have any more emails and I don't see any more hands. So if you do happen to think of a question and we've already signed off from the meeting, please feel free to use that advisory committee email if you want to. You can also reach out to your employer help representative. We can help you in all the same ways we normally help you and get these questions answered for you. So barring any more raised hands in the next 30 seconds or so, I think we can probably talk about our next meeting, Diane, if we have the dates.
I'll jump in. Just an appreciation of your flexibility. I know this is a big change. Like I said, we're reacting to this legislation kind of in real time like you are, and your flexibility, your questions will help us refine the process, will help us answer questions that we could put on future FAQs for some of your colleagues and peers that might not have heard this. We can continue to put those up. So if there's something that comes up a lot about a question, we can have that answered and maybe reduce the amount of questions that you get at the COE, all of those sorts of things. So again, I appreciate your time, your questions, your patience with us, and flexibility around how we're all working through this process, that it's very new and it's foundational. It's a huge change to CalSTRS. This is a massive piece of legislation, and we are doing our best to try and stay at least 5 feet in front of it. And we will continue to keep you informed and updated on things that are going on. And always, like Kim said, we appreciate your questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So our next EAC is on Wednesday, May 10th. It will be a Zoom, like we're used to for now. And I know there's been some conversation about the timing of the agenda, and we are working hard to make sure that that gets finalized a little sooner for you all, so you're prepared with your questions when we meet. So with that said, does anyone from the panel have anything else they'd like to add? All right, well, thanks you all for joining us this afternoon, and thanks to all of our presenters. And we hope that you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.